So I am recording now, just so that I can make summary notes at the end of our meeting. And we have been posting these recordings to our website just because there does seem to be interest from the public in having these available for review. Okay. Is that Chuck? Are you the one who just called in?
Ann Malik, good morning.
Oh, good morning, Ann. Good to see you. I was hoping Chuck would join us, but he might not, just since he was also at a late meeting last night. Here.
Yeah, Chuck is also, there's the small area plan for Zion Crossroads. He's probably going to attend that.
Yep, that sounds likely. Okay. And that's where I lost Sandy and Chip to as well. So, all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as Chris said, the stack is also happening.
What's that? Sorry, Shane, I didn't hear you.
State Trails Advisory Committee is also happening, as Chris said. He's doing double duty there. So.
Oh my goodness. Lots of meetings this morning. Well, thank you for those of you who can join us today. Real quick, one map check-in. Amanda, last time we talked, there were just two areas that hadn't been mapped in yet, Ragged Mountain and Ivy Creek. I think Chris and Dan were supposed to take care of each of those. How is that going?
Good question. I don't remember. I think that everything got worked out and it was all ready to go. I'm gonna have to check in with Bob. I'm sorry, I should have had that prepared. But
we got the Ragged and Ivy Creek trails added to the one map. I believe this box is checked.
Yeah, I think so too. And I can't remember what Bob was doing next, but ultimately, I think the PDC was planning on hosting that combined, once he combines all of this stuff, that the PDC was going to be hosting that data, I thought.
Yes, I believe that's correct. And we're going through a website update at the moment, so it'll be easy to find a spot for that on our website.
Okay, if we could come back to this, I'll send Bob a quick email and just see if he can send us an update and I'll share it.
Sure, absolutely. Cool. And then are you going to check in?
A quick question?
Yes, Anne, go ahead.
I'm sorry. My question was, is this trails in the water in the reservoir area or somewhere else? Because that was the main thing that caught my eye from the headline of the notice. So could you explain to me where these trails are that are being put on some map?
It's the existing hiking trails in the Ragged Mountain property, and then I guess as we add on the new Hayward, they're just listed as soft surface for the one map purposes.
But they're for hiking. They're not specific.
Yeah, I'm not sure how the one map and the current legal status line up in terms of data. These are just the lines that show that the trails exist. The one map doesn't have any effect on what happens with the use question that still is, I guess, technically unresolved at the legal level.
But it does, well, it needs to reflect what's there today, which is no bicycling. And so that is, I think it's really important at every stage that the right information get out there so that people don't get themselves into a situation because they didn't know or didn't have the opportunity to know what was available and what wasn't. So that
I believe I tagged them as pedestrian path because those were the options under one map. Maybe
Good.
What we do is follow up and make sure that tag somehow reflects what you're saying there, Ann. So we can follow up on that.
Yeah, pedestrian paths sounds great to me. I thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day. Bye.
Okay.
Hey, Jessica, this is Dan. I just stepped in. I don't know if I missed anything with this discussion here.
I don't think you did. It sounds like we have the Ragged Mountain and Ivy Creek info, and it's been submitted to the city. Amanda is checking in with Bob, but it sounds like everything is there finally. And it sounds like, based on Anne's comment, it might make sense for this committee to review how things look before we make it available to the public.
I mean, internally with the county, I worked a lot with Parks and Rec on this. made sure this specifically Ivy Creek to see that this trail data is what is used for their maps. And so, you know, we want to make sure everything was, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I don't think that was to minimize the work that's already been put into it. I think we just, it might be, it should be fun for all of us to take a look at what it looks like all put together before we share it. So I would include that as a next step. All right. Once we do that, I think we should have a more in-depth conversation about distribution and promotion. I know it's pretty easy to promote a map like this on social media or on our websites, but if there are other things that we want to do, that might be something to talk about in the near future. So just putting that on everyone's radar. We don't have to have that discussion today, but we should start thinking about it and be planning to roll this out effectively in the near future. All right, Amanda, and you can just let me know whenever you hear back from Bob if you want to just jump in, and we can come back to this later in the meeting.
But Jessica, I assume this will be an interactive map, is that correct? Versus a print?
Amanda, tell us more.
Sorry, trying to unmute myself here. Honestly, I don't remember. You know, it's been 2 years, and I'm not a tech person, and somehow because Bob offered to write the script to combine all of the data, I've become the point person, but I don't really know. You know, I think that was up to us to decide how we wanted to use it.
That definitely was the goal. We don't want to be producing PDF maps. Yeah, this is a user-friendly, interactive map of bike ped infrastructure.
And this is Chris. Those lines are going to show up on our online web GIS. I talked to Mark Simpson. One map's going to become our trail layer for the city. And so it'll pop in when you use our mobile app at Ivy Creek, at Ragged, or around the city. And it'll also be what pops up if you turn on the city's web viewer on the internet. They'll pop in as lines. I'm not exactly sure how they interface with Ivy Creek Foundation's mobile online stuff. We can talk about that offline and see if there's any way to cross-coordinate those.
I was out running Ragged Mountain a couple weeks ago, and there are quite a few folks riding mountain bikes on the trails. Yep,
they're out there, and the dogs are out there. At the moment, that's something county police have to enforce. We can't enforce it as park staff because we're not deputized to hand out tickets. So I'm going to have that conversation with county police soon and just figure out what we do with a weird legal situation that still isn't resolved, and what the reality of what people are doing out there. There's people swimming out there too, and they're not supposed to be doing that. So we got to have a talk pretty soon.
To Shane's point, though, I think the having the data be you know, in a single spot and accessible is the key thing. And then depending on what you all and even the legislative bodies decide to have be public, then public third parties could pull pieces of that data and use it in all kinds of different ways. Like maybe RTF would want to use that for their map, or Chris mentioned Ivy Creek, or even get someone like Willow Tree involved. But having the data be unified is the main thing.
Okay, so I got Bob responded and says they're finalizing the ArcGIS online mechanism for sharing. The county will be able to put their data there, and the city will take care of our data and UVAs. I haven't looked into the Ragged Mountain data. I asked about, you know, is Ragged Mountain and Ivy Creek tagged as pedestrian path? He hasn't looked into Ragged Mountain. The county is responsible for Ivy Creek. Ask their representative about that item. That's all I got.
Okay, thank you so much,
Creek.
Amanda.
Sorry, I was just trying to understand what that was from. Is the question about the specifics for the
Yeah, you may have missed Dan. Anne was on the call earlier and was concerned about how they're showing up. Are they like, I think she doesn't want them to be shown as a biking path. So just making sure that it's tagged as a pedestrian path rather than multi-use or shared use.
This is Michael Barnes here. Can I ask a question, which is, as far as the next steps go, what about QA/QC on the data, and just and also, will it be available can we download the files into a GIS system on our own desktops?
You should be able to, yeah. I mean, I know for the city's data, it's currently on our open data portal, so that can be downloaded. But as far as I don't know what they're setting up on ArcGIS Online, but I assume that it would also be able to be downloaded from there.
And what about a QA/QC period? I guess you guys are going through that. I'd be sort of interested in looking at some of the stuff myself.
I think it'd be smart once, I mean, we did do that prior to the merge. I think it'd be smart for all of us to reevaluate that before it goes live.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we did the same. We looked at it internally, and but I'm sure there's stuff that we missed.
So it sounds like we have a few remaining technical questions. Amanda, do you think we can get Bob at our October meeting?
Yeah, I can certainly ask.
Okay, great.
What is that? Do we have a date for that?
I was hoping to move things to the third Thursday of the month, but I'm not sure how that works with everyone's schedules. We have a few folks missing today, but I'm not sure if that's just because of random other meetings that got scheduled, or if we move it to the third Thursday, is that overlapping with existing regular meetings?
Yeah.
So it's either going to be the second or third Thursday. I'll try to clarify that in the next couple of days. And
Okay.
I will, if you just want to share his email with me, I don't know that I have it, then I can send a request to him directly.
Sure.
Cool. So it sounds like our technical questions include, can all of the GIS information included in the map be downloaded onto personal computers? How is the map going to interface with existing GIS maps from like the Ivy Creek Foundation and others? How interactive is it? And some quality control questions. Does that sound like an accurate summary of what we've been talking about? Anything I missed? Okay, if you think of anything else, let me know, because I'll try to give Bob those questions ahead of time so he feels really prepared. Okay, moving on to the next topic. So the Rivanna River crossing. So as staff know, there was a feasibility study completed. And sorry, I have to minimize everyone's little pictures so I can read all my words. There was a feasibility study conducted by VDOT Consultants. I believe everyone should have gotten a copy of that study, but I'm going to review it here just so everyone is on the same page. So the need for a bike and this presentation, it's really short. It's about 5 minutes. I'm going to give it to you. And it was the same presentation that I gave to the Rivanna Corridor Steering Committee. So folks like Tim will have already heard all this stuff. So the need for a bike and pedestrian crossing of the Rivanna River in the vicinity of Riverview Park to connect the Pantops region to the city of Charlottesville has been identified in numerous planning documents. And these are, the big three. The county's Pantops Master Plan, the city's Bike and Ped Master Plan, and the TJPDC's Jefferson Area Bike and Ped Plan. The feasibility study was done at the request of City of Charlottesville and Albemarle County, is how we described it to the steering committee. VDOT's Transportation, Mobility, and Planning Division hired consultants to do a feasibility study to develop a conceptual plan and planning level cost estimate for such a connection. And this is just a picture of their study area. So as you can see, it centers around Riverview Park. Ultimately, the consultants came up with two suggested alignments. Option one is in Indigo. It's the more northern one, from Chesapeake Street and Riverside Avenue to Peter Jefferson Parkway / State Farm Boulevard. The second option is in Teal. It's the more southerly one, from East Market Street to that same intersection over in Pantops. So the first option, the one coming from Chesapeake, would look a little bit like this, according to the consultants. Be a single truss bridge. These are some, a picture of somewhere else where they have a bridge like that in a rendering over on the right. The second bridge would have a pier in the middle on the sediment island, and it would look a lot like this one from a different location. Okay, so the engineering basics, option one, starting at Chesapeake, like I said, would be a single truss bridge. The span would be 325 feet long. The bridge span would have a clearance of 40 feet over normal river height and 15 feet over floodplain height. The bridge and the path would maintain a grade of 5% or less for the entirety of the bridge. Option two, the one beginning on East Market Street, would be an arch bridge with a pier on the mid-river sediment island. Each span, there'd be two spans, would be 296 feet long. The first span has a clearance of only 5 feet over normal river height and only 1 foot over the floodplain. The bridge and the path would mostly maintain a grade of 5% or less, but about 150 feet of it, of the path in particular, would have a grade of 6.5%. Connectivity and other concerns. Option one, starting at Chesapeake, provides a direct connection to the Rivanna Trail, Riverview Park's parking lot, and Chesapeake Street, which, as we all know, leads to downtown Charlottesville. And it is expected to be the easier of two options to construct because of the absence of in-river construction. Option two, beginning at East Market, provides a direct connection to the Woolen Mills Economic Development Site, but East Market Street has a constrained 20-foot cross-section that doesn't allow for separate bike or ped facilities at that far east end. There's also limited parking availability along East Market Street for recreational users. So that's something to consider. There's a little bit more of that available in Chesapeake, and there are potential impacts of this connection to the historical canal and lock system. Permitting. So both option one and option two would require a permit from the Virginia Marine Resources Commission, but then they would also both require some hydraulic modeling of the 100-year floodplain. The consultants believe and stated in their feasibility study that for option one, beginning at Chesapeake, there was a really low risk of impact to the floodplain, but for option two, there was a significantly higher risk of impact to the floodplain, and that would likely require a bunch more permits from a bunch of different organizations. Okay, and lastly, cost estimates. When all is said and done, the Chesapeake option was cheaper, coming in at about $11 million plus contingencies. Option two, East Market, came in at about $15 million. Both of those estimates included right-of-way purchase from State Farm and the Presidio development properties. So any negotiation of an easement would reduce those total costs. Okay, so that's it. That's a brief summary of the feasibility study. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for just a second and see if anyone wants to discuss anything that's come out of that feasibility study.
Hey, Jessica, this is Chris. I'm going to do this real quick because I'm tracking this other meeting at the same time. I think two questions we might want to figure out is, why is the one bridge significantly closer to flood level than the other? Is that a given, or can they make the other one taller if that clears the floodplain better? I don't know. I think it's a question to put out there. The other one I would imagine would be a question is, what if we wanted a truss bridge at the one location or a suspension bridge at the other location? Does the location define the design? And again, that's a question I don't know the answer to, but I think it might be, if people started asking, well, I like the design of option two, but I like the location of option one, is that possible? I think those are two questions we might want to pose to the consultants, just as a generic, you know, they don't have to do the math, but to kind of say, like, if somebody asks, what's the answer to these two questions? Because if East Market can be a higher option and clear the flood thing, that may or may not lean towards how the decisions are made.
Great, great questions. Anyone else?
Has there been, and this may be something we need to talk to Chuck about, but what type of public input, or is there a public input strategy? I mean, as we saw with the Route 20, hopefully we learned a lesson from that. And technically, all planning studies are required to have some type of public input as per VDOT guidance. So again, this may be something we need to talk to Chuck about. However, I would think that we learned some lessons from the Route 20 study. So anyway, that's something that probably needs to be discussed. And also, it seems like there's already alternatives. So, I mean, will the public input ask specifically, yay or nay, do you like this specific one? And what if they come back and say, no, we don't like either one? I mean, again, this is something that probably needs to be addressed sooner rather than later.
Yes, good point, Shane. And we have learned so many lessons from Route 20. I'm going to get into a little bit more about public input next. So like I said, I presented that feasibility study summary to the Rivanna Corridor Committee, like steering committee. They have a plan for public input. And once we get done talking a little bit more about the feasibility study, if people have more questions on that, we'll move into how we're going to move forward with public input with that group. But thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Shane.
I'm assuming there is or will be a paved path running up to the bridge on both sides.
Yes.
Again, VDOT's not going to fund a bridge that's connected with the natural surface trail.
Right. Yep, I think when we talked about yes, there is definitely path on the east side in particular, on the Pantop side, with a much more shorter section of trail on the west side.
Thank you for those two questions are perfect. And I would say that the way to maximize the value of this feasibility study is for it to provide good information for the public to make a decision with. So that's sort of the goals, rather than pointing toward suggested outcomes or whatever. So, you know, what we're asking from the consultant should always have that goal in mind. If the feasibility study could contain more public input, that would be desirable. But whether it's the consultant or us or some other group, the soon next step is going to be having a good conversation with the public. To this, I haven't seen the full study, but last time I checked in, one of the factors at the time the consultant was leaning more toward what's now option 2. That seems to have changed, but one of the reasons is because of the approaches for that higher bridge could be long or potentially using a bunch of footprint or et cetera. And so I would say at a minimum, we need to be prepared to talk about not only what's happening with the bridge, but what's happening on either end of the bridge, because that's actually a pretty major, a major factor. And at least having, you know, ballpark guidance would be helpful.
Yeah, so to that point, Peter, and just because I see Peter Olms's comment in the chat, there at one end, on the Pantop's end, there was a drawing in the feasibility study that showed some sort of like open air structure on the Pantop side at the beginning of the trail that would be kind of an official trailhead, inviting people to use this trail. And it would be a place where there would be parking spaces and be a good spot to start riding a bike or walking from. All right. Any other questions or comments on the feasibility study stuff? I'm also just going to read this out loud. So from Tim Padalino in the chat, he said he just wanted to try to clarify that there does not appear to be any acquisition costs related to the Presidio property. Riverbend Development has reserved a special lot to dedicate to the county, about 6 to 7 acres between their apartment development and the adjoining State Farm property. So if I'm understanding that correctly, Tim, it sounds like the overall costs of both of those projects would be reduced significantly because there would be no right-of-way acquisition needed. All right. Anything else on the feasibility study?
Yeah, this is Michael Barnes here. I put something on the chat. So it's unclear from what you guys presented how this bridge site connects to downtown.
It would only connect to downtown in as much as it connects to streets that lead towards downtown. So option 1 was going to connect would have Chesapeake as its western terminus. And that obviously leads towards downtown, and the other option 2 connects to East Market Street, which also leads towards downtown.
So is the thought then that both of those road routes would be sort of like Sharrows? I know both streets are pretty small.
Yeah, I don't think that that had come up in the feasibility study, except to say that on East Market Street, there was there was a large chunk of it that's very narrow, and there's absolutely no way to include any separate facilities. I know that Chesapeake is also rather narrow, and I'm not sure that they would be able to include like a bike lane. Amanda, would you want to offer any more thoughts on what the bike and ped facilities would look like?
This is Chris, real quick. We did some studies when Woollen Mills redeveloped, and there's a number of options on Market as well as Broadway, and then up through Carlton through Belmont. I think for the bridge, we've got to land on a public street for biking and a sidewalk, which you're right, the last piece of Market in the county, there'd have to be some discussions about. I mean, it's a very, very low trafficked street, even with the Woollen Mills. I don't think they're opening their front door on the Market side on purpose. But I think that would have to be put into context with the bridge. We need logical destinations on both sides. So Chesapeake has a sidewalk and you can bike on Chesapeake. What happens in the future to really connect the Woollen Mills and this bridge and Pantops into downtown? I think the city and the county were working on that when the mill building came in. So there's some conceptual ideas about how to improve any or all 3 of those routes, but I don't know where the funding and the engineering is on those particular pieces. The Broadway one looks really good because Broadway is a super wide street, at least up to Carlton. But I think that depends on how the mill site's considered public access and how would you bike from this bridge to Broadway type things. I'm not sure those have been worked out yet.
Yeah, I mean, I would only add that Chesapeake and Market are both kind of considered shared roadways in the bicycle and pedestrian master plan. So, you know, that's in addition to what Chris said about using Broadway Carlton. That's really all I have to add.
I just conclude with, I think if you're going to spend 10.
Sorry,
Yeah, I would just conclude. Sorry, I just would conclude that if you're going to try and make a $10 million, $15 million ask for a bridge, making sure that's a lot of money. Make sure it has connectivity to some of the destinations into the city is probably going to be a major weak point of the concept. If you don't find out a way to resolve that, I can see that being a major problem as you move forward.
Sure. So it does seem like there are some limitations to the feasibility study as it's been conducted so far, and it sounds like we've got the local experts to help us figure out more what the facilities would look like once it reaches the end of what's been studied with the feasibility study. All right. So moving on, so like I said, that presentation was something that I gave to the Urban Rivanna River Corridor Plan Steering Committee. And they've also taken it to their technical committee. So this group recently had a steering committee meeting. This is the group that Sandy was here talking about last time. They're working on that whole corridor plan for the Rivanna River area that extends north of the Riverview Park area. Basically, their most recent meeting, they discussed the vision statement, the guiding principles, the benchmarking and public engagement strategies for their plan. And their next steps are to get public feedback on all of those things, especially the draft recommendations that have been compiled by the technical committee so far. And in those draft recommendations is where it relates to us. The draft recommendations include implementing a new bicycle and pedestrian bridge in the Riverview area as one of the recommendations. So the corridor plan they have a website, and that website has been updated with the public survey that includes the vision statement, the guiding principles, and most importantly, those recommendations. They are going to, in the near future, be posting signs along the river directing people to the website. They are working with the economic development staff as well as equity and diversity and inclusion staff at the city and the county to expand outreach efforts beyond just posting those signs. And the public survey will ask people to pick the top 7 recommendations out of the list of recommendations suggested by the technical committee. So that is as much public engagement is currently planned for this project, which, as you can see, doesn't really get at many of the details of the feasibility study. It basically just asks the public, is a new bicycle and pedestrian bridge in this area in your top 7 choices? So I want to open up the discussion. We had some ideas last meeting about how we wanted to have way more public engagement, but I'm just not sure how we want to move forward. If we just want to post the feasibility study to the corridor plans website, or if we wanted to talk about hosting a public workshop, or what are people's thoughts?
I think the city end, at least, and we'll talk with the county folks as well, this definitely deserves its own meeting. The neighborhoods involved need to have their input, the people in general, but as with the smart scale stuff, like we learned last time, I think we can't depend on, well, it was on the website. We need to specially invite stakeholders, Woollen Mills neighborhood, probably the BPAC, the river people, and I'm happy to help set up, again, I know it's COVID time, but to advertise, put posters at the park, particularly that say, hey, there's a proposal and here's how you input, and both put it on the web and say, if you just want to go look at it on your own, that's an option, here it is. Make sure everybody's aware that it's out there, get the Willow Tree folks involved. And there will be a Zoom open house, for lack of a better word, maybe kind of thing, and maybe set up 1 or 2 of those. And so I'm happy to do that, help set that up, and with Amanda and Kevin and Daniel, whatever it needs to be, so that we do a specific thing about the bridge. And at that meeting also mention the corridor study, so that we're not, neither one's holding the other one up or assuming that one of those projects is going to gather all of the input for the other one. So that would be my thoughts on it.
Great, thanks, Chris, and thanks for volunteering.
Yeah, and also, given that this is a VDOT study, I don't think just generically, I think there'll need to be some questions asked specifically about what the study did, not just the corridor study, which is somewhat unrelated in this sense, meaning, VDOT has spent this money on providing alternatives. It's not conceptual at this point in the sense that we're not asking, would you like a river crossing? It's like we've already spent, a lot of money on determining which one. So I think, yeah, as Chris said, there has to be, and again, we'll have to work with Chuck on this, but I think there's going to have to be some independent public input on the feasibility study, not the not the corridor study, because again, that has nothing, and again, I don't say it's not related, it's very related, but again, I don't think just, I think input needs to happen on the feasibility study itself. And again, that may be something that VDOT actually has to develop, you know, do something specifically. I don't know, but I mean, obviously we'll have to work with stakeholders, but I don't think including it as part and parcel of the corridor study is going to be enough.
Great, thanks, Shane. I think it's important to hear that from VDOT, so thank you.
And we've also got, we did some Riverview Park nominal planning with the neighborhood a couple years ago. We're putting a restroom in there. We had some trail thoughts, and there's the boating and parking and more access points. So there's already somewhat of a group of public folks that I've got a list for that I would invite to this because they're specifically interested in Riverview Park. We would also take input about Riverview Park at that time. So I think yeah, to Shane's point, the meeting ought to be about the bridge mostly, but anything else we gather about the river, we would filter back into the other appropriate plans and studies that are going on.
And also related to the public input, will it be put, I mean, it's great to have specific invited groups, but what about the larger public? I think for the Route 20, it kind of fell into that trap. Yes, some certain groups knew about it, but it was never really opened up, from my understanding, to the larger public to comment on. So again, stakeholder groups are not necessarily represent the entire population that could use this. So again, that's something that might need to be addressed as well.
Right, and we can do, we've certainly gotten better with park planning. We mail something out to every address within a quarter mile of a park. We put flyers all over the park. I wouldn't be opposed to a press release to make sure this gets out into the general press. I'm with you, Shane. The more, basically, we want to make sure everybody at least knows it's going on and has the ability to comment if they want to, because the last thing you want is someone saying, I didn't even know this was happening, what's going on? So we could have council announce it at a council meeting, like in their announcement section, and do both the known stakeholders and the broader public. I think this is a great opportunity to showcase how well we can do with getting the word out. Whether we get a lot of comment back or not is a different story, but we want to make sure everybody can say, yes, I was aware I could have commented, I just didn't have any comments, rather than, no, I had no idea what's going on, and then we get derailed again. Plus, it's a neat community asset. I would want as much input as possible on something that's, I think, potentially a huge win for the entire community, whether you're bike ped or not.
Any other comments? I mean, I think it's a resounding, there's a lot of desire to have a lot more public engagement, and hearing that, you know, VDOT is really expecting it. I think there's good reason to do that. So I'm going to talk to Sandy and Chip and see what we can come up with. Chris, I'll probably be talking to you a little bit more after I talk to them, so we can get something set up and start getting those invites out and start posting things publicly. All right. So next we are going to move into smart scale stuff. And since Chuck is not here, we're not going to do any real updates. I mean, I think that everyone here is very well aware of the smart scale process and where we are at. But for a few members of the public who are here, everything has been submitted for this round. I think nearly everything has its resolutions of support. So we're just kind of waiting on that, and we will hear back in January or February how initial scoring has gone for those projects that have been submitted. All right. Also, there is a change to the smart scale process. So that is what I'm going to go over next. Sharing my screen again. Okay. So historically, at any time before pre-applications are due, the localities could ask the MPO or the PDC to apply for smart scale projects on their behalf. and the MPO or the PDC would agree or not based on the number of available slots and the staff time and resources available to work on such an application. The pre-applications would be submitted in April, full applications submitted in August. MPO Tech and CTAC would hear, and the policy board would hear about the projects at their meetings. Those meetings are open to the public, and the MPO policy board, as well as the locality's governing bodies, would decide whether or not to give their resolutions of support for these projects. So that's just a quick review, especially for members of the public, about how things typically have worked. So because of everything that went awry with the Route 20 project and that shared use path, there was a desire within the PDC and MPO to change the smart scale process for the MPO. So these process changes that I'm about to describe would only apply to the MPO area, so City of Charlottesville and Urban Albemarle. And it would not in any way impact how the City of Charlottesville or Albemarle would apply for their own projects. This is just if this would only apply to those localities asking the MPO to apply on their behalf. Okay, so specific procedures for this new process still need to be drafted, but very tentatively, what Chip has come up with, our executive director has come up with, is that the MPO policy board, as well as CTAC and the MPO technical committee, will review the most recent round of submitted projects when initial scores are released by VDOT in January or February after this most recent August submission for lessons learned, and to determine whether or not those projects should be reapplied for in the next round of smart scale applications. Albemarle County and the City of Charlottesville will still be able to request the MPO and the PDC apply for new projects on their behalf, but this request would need to be made almost a year earlier than it has been done historically, and the requests would tentatively go through CTAC and the MPO Tech Committee, who would make recommendations to the MPO Policy Board, not only about whether the project should be considered for application, but also whether it is a major or a minor project. And this is probably the most important part. So minor projects are what they sound like. These are not projects that we expect too much. We don't expect an unusual amount of community engagement to be needed, or much more design to be needed compared to what's already done. So the MPO policy board for a minor project would determine whether or not the MPO can apply for, has the resources to apply for the project on the locality's behalf, and there would be no process changes from that point forward. Major projects would be something that CTAC or MPO Tech or the policy board acknowledge that that project would require additional community engagement because it's perhaps in a sensitive area, and or the design has not, there's a lot of questions about the design, or there needs to be more design work done before it can be applied for, or it's a project that in order to have a good, it would need a local match perhaps in order to score well within smart scales process. So in regards to the major projects, the MPO can really only agree to do at most 2 major projects per cycle. And within that 2 maximum, that would include any MPO generated projects of regional importance. So really, we can only handle 2 big projects because of what we want to do with these big projects. So the next step would be for the policy board to determine whether or not the MPO can apply for the project on the locality's behalf. And if they can, and it's a major project, the policy board would appoint an advisory panel, which would begin meeting in October of year 1 of the 2-year smart scale cycle, to review the objectives of the project and possible design options. This advisory panel would be modeled off of what was done with hydraulic in 29. So this very in-depth public engagement process and in-depth review of design options, including the possibility of hiring outside consultants to do additional design work or engineering. The advisory panel would provide updates to the MPO technical committee, to the CTAC, and to the MPO policy board. There would be lots more public engagement. And like I said, there might be technical support from VDOT or outside consulting firms to help with the things that the PDC or the MPO is not capable of helping with. We are better at doing the public engagement side of things, not the engineering. Okay, are there any questions on what we've talked about? Okay. Well, if you think of anything, or if you have any comments about how you would like to see that process, like I said, what I've described is just really tentative ideas of how it would move forward. If you want to suggest anything for how, for our draft procedures, just email me or email Chip. Okay. So next, Chris had some great pictures of some interstate ramp crosswalks. And the reason that's so interesting, again, goes back to Route 20. So one of the reasons the Route 20 project, the Route 20 project had a shared use path going down the median of Route 20. And the reason they did that was because it seemed very dangerous to have bikes and peds crossing interstate ramps. So let's see here. Chris, I'm going to bring up some pictures and then you can talk to us about them.
Okay, and I'll have to be quick because I think my presentation's about to pop up shortly on the other state trails piece. Basically, it's a concept thing where the median trail piece had benefits for some safety things. It had some drawbacks. It had, you know, the tree issue and all that for Route 20 South. In my travels this summer, I would occasionally go from a relatively large street in a city onto an interstate ramp and go, wow, they have a crosswalk. Look at that. They're not all perfectly wonderful, but they're there. And some of them are VDOT, some were in Maryland on the DC Capitol Beltway. And my brain kind of went, if you can cross the Route 29 DC Capitol Beltway entry ramp with a crosswalk, we could probably pull it off down here, especially when our traffic volumes are much lower. So the reason I throw this back to the committee just to talk about, I still think it's feasible that we could run down particularly the Piedmont College side of Route 20. I think the other side, just the way that interstate ramps are designed, going across that weave motion coming into northbound, I don't see how that could be made safe. But conceptually think you can make safe crossings of the 20 south to 64 west, and then the exit ramps that come down onto the other side on the south side to Scottsville with good engineering, active flasher beacons. The sight lines actually seem to be there. So I just wanted to put it back on the table to go, I still think there's a way to make 20 happen. And if it's not in the median, I would like to somehow explore this. I doubt VDOT's got the money. Maybe they do. But I think maybe we discuss it internally and go like, you know, would we be comfortable with a 13-year-old crossing one of these ramps? That's kind of my judgment standard is, would I let a 13-year-old kid do this? Would I call that safe? Or if that's not our target audience, you know, would it help 95% of people making this motion with the knowledge that you're not going to send a 12-year-old out there on their own without somebody helping them? So I just wanted to put it out there. I didn't want to abandon the Route 20 connection and seeing these other examples. The one you were showing was Virginia Beach, the bird neck. You can see the sidewalk coming down on the northwest quadrant, crossing, going through the median. Now the southern intersection is traffic light controlled. We don't have that situation here. Obviously a signal controlled, you can do a lot more. But they even have ramp in the northeast quadrant going across that on ramp. So to me, it's technically possible. We might want to talk about it. Is that really acceptable for us? And if we deem it acceptable, if it could be done technically, then we authorize the technical study to say, okay, show us what it would look like to go down the west side of Route 20. So that's my 2 cents. And then I probably got to jump over to my other meeting, but I'm just putting it out for discussion.
Great, Chris, thank you for that. And I also wanted to note that Peter Olms has commented in the chat that he's previously recommended the review and use of ITE's recommended practices on accommodating peds and bikes at interchanges for this topic. So Shane, I know you're not Chuck, but what are the chances of us getting another feasibility study from VDOT on something like this that removes the shared use path down the middle and looks at something that utilizes crosswalks at the ramps, because I think that had been pretty summarily dismissed by the consultants in the first round. So yeah, what are the chances of us getting another feasibility study?
All I know is you can get Chuck to request it. I mean, that's basically all I can say in terms of, I mean, obviously there was, I assume that the whole median thing was looked at based on some concerns previous to, I mean, with crossing the interstate on-ramp. So again, I don't know if, I guess the concern is then what happens if this study or that alternative is not liked, then do you request another study? And then, I mean, again, it's, I don't know. Chuck can request it. I get that's, and we will review it in the central office.
I would be somewhat confident that, from what I recall, the only opposition was trees. I don't remember anybody saying a trail down there is a non-starter, but correct, Shane, you're right. Some people might go, I'm not crossing an interstate ramp. I like the median one, and then what do you do? So yeah, that's an unknown. But yeah, if you can ask Chuck, that would be wonderful. Obviously, if the answer is no, we'll just have to put it in the freezer and work on it another day.
I'll also note that there was some question of safety with the Route 20 feasibility study, especially at the north end, which I'm not sure. I mean, that was the safety question was, is it safe for people to cross Route 20 or not? And if people were concerned about the safety of crossing Route 20, I'm not sure that they would feel any better about the safety of crossing the ramps. So I do think that there's still some concerns in addition to the trees with an alternative like you're suggesting, Chris. I also want to note that Peter has mentioned in the chat that there was a sense of I think the sense of the board was that there should be a step back and ask the public, how ought we to solve this A to B question, not what do you think of this idea? So yes, and board means Board of Supervisors, not the MPO Policy Board. Let's see. So, and you also mentioned, Peter, pointing to the idea of having a steering committee, or I think you're referring to the advisory panels as Chip was suggesting for the revision to the smart scale process. I'm not, yeah, I think that I'm curious from a planning perspective what everyone else's thoughts are in terms of just asking the public really broadly, how do you think we should solve this problem, as opposed to coming to them with a bunch of ideas and saying what works best for you. What are people's thoughts on how to proceed? It sounds like we need to talk to the public and we need more engineering information. I'm not 100% sure how we can move forward. And also Dan has noted that prior to requesting another study of this route on 20, there were comments suggesting to study another potential route for connection to Monticello. Let's see. Yes, I think that that was mentioned a lot, especially by the tree stewards, that maybe we could avoid Route 20 altogether and look at different ways of reaching Monticello. But I'm not sure that, I mean, that was just not studied in the feasibility study. So I'm not sure how realistic it is.
There's a way to get to Monticello maybe with a great big complex tunnel project. There's a way to get to Piedmont PVC with a great big complex tunnel project. And then there's the Route 21. You know, on a 100-year horizon, all three of those would be great if we had the money and unlimited resources. And I guess, like Peter's saying, maybe we need to get a smaller group to kind of wrap our head around, if the tunnel project's $20 million and requires a massive amount of engineering and Route 20 is still sitting there, do you just go with Route 20 for now? And then I think if we did get a stakeholder group, I don't remember walking the Route 20 thing, but I might not have been there for the walk. Something tells me taking a walk might also be useful with a stakeholder group, and I'll maybe leave it to Peter to see what he might think about putting such a group together. Be happy to join.
I guess the point I want to make is before we discuss requesting studying Route 20 further, maybe we should really keep this open to what's called out in the bike ped plan is a lot PVCC as well from Woolen Mills. Chris, you mentioned these, but I just feel like maybe we're focused too much on 20.
I think once you start talking about tunneling under an interstate, I just think, again, I'm not an engineer, but we're talking about the cost for, I mean, if you start getting into $30 million for a 1 mile path, shared use path. I mean, you got to think about what's going to compete. Yeah, you could study anything and you could come up with an engineering solution. I mean, that is not the issue. It is it going to compete? And I can tell you $30 million or 20 million even, I mean, it's probably given the size of Charlottesville and the use and all, I just don't see that being successful.
Yeah,
And to
I'd
the
like
larger
to.
example of that point, we got to talk about Piedmont College too. Going to Monticello's got a great recreational tourism value. Going to Piedmont's got equity, alternative transportation, and all sorts of other values. So when we look at what are we trying to get to and what's the best way to get there, we got to make sure we include Piedmont and the other neighborhoods. It's not purely to Monticello.
And I'd like to add on to Shane's points, Michael, here. I don't know, I believe the cost for this project was about $6 million. It'll be interesting to see how similar projects will do in the smart scale funding this year coming. And my sense of things is that this project probably would not have competed very well. I don't think it would be a great diversion of trips to reduce congestion. I don't think it would have hit a lot of the other things. I'm not completely sure that it would fund well. Chuck is obviously the person to speak to that, but I would come back and think about cost and can you get this thing funded, even the project you were talking about previously. And then to the second point, which is I'm still not quite sure how this project got to the top and became the #1 choice for the community. It was a second or third tier ranking in the PDC's plan. I realized it was an opportunity, but I kind of wonder if there aren't other opportunities for trails within the community that might either benefit larger populations or might score better on a smart scale rubric. And I'm hoping that the one map project will give us a capacity to sort of take a little bit more holistic look at things. I'm not quite sure that this project ranks, at least in my mind, as what the community's focus should be.
Michael, to answer your question, right when this the bike ped plan was adopted, this committee we met and basically the goal was to look for city-county connections, and it really came down to the Ravenna River crossing, which we learned evaluating this were going to be potential studies, and that's how we have the Route 20, Ravenna River, and then I think even in the city, the 250 connection there, but that just kind of fizzled out. But I agree, reevaluating that whole process.
Yeah, Dan, I was at that meeting, and I think the 3 options were brought to the meeting, but there are other places connecting the red fields into the city, stuff in the Route 29 corridor, a lot of population density up there. And, I just come back to trying to think about utility of your next round of smart scale projects and how they might score well would be a good place to sort of step back and maybe take the lens and look a little bit broader before you come back, put all your eggs back in the Route 20 basket.
I definitely agree with you.
So I'm going to kind of wrap this conversation up. I will say for however the project ended up where it is now, VDOT has invested resources in doing the feasibility study. So I think at this point, it's a question really for the county if they would like the PDC to potentially investigate this, or the MPO to investigate this further, potentially with an advisory panel. I see, Kevin, you just popped on and you probably have no idea what we're talking about. I'll follow up with you later. But I think that's where we're at. So either the project is kind of is done from the MPO perspective, I guess it's done from the MPO perspective, unless we hear from the county that there is an interest in pursuing it further, with the MPO taking the lead on stuff like that. All right. So now with our last hour, I want to talk more about the bike and ped count. So we had the beginnings of a discussion last week. Last month, I shared a lot of info with staff members regarding the previous counts. And then just yesterday, I sent staff members a pretty detailed scope of how I think this project could go. So what I'd like to do today is, sharing my screen again. What I would like to do today is to review the scope and get feedback from staff and finalize the count locations as much as we possibly can in this hour. I don't think that we'll have time to assign tasks, and I don't think that really makes sense until the count locations have been finalized. So if we don't have time to do that, I'll be following up with staff after this meeting to kind of ask for help in terms of requesting volunteers and other things like that. Okay, so for members of the public who didn't read the scope, I will just go over the very basics. So project goals, the primary goal as decided by this committee at our last meeting was to improve bicycle and pedestrian planning in the region through the collection of project-specific data. The reason I'm talking about project-specific data is because there was this focus on a lot of people liked the idea of having before and after data for projects to compare how effective that facility was for increasing ridership or whatever. And then the project will have two secondary goals. The first one, just because I don't want to miss an opportunity to get data to better understand how COVID restrictions have impacted local travel behavior, and to collaborate with VDOT to better understand automatic counter accuracy. So I think we can do all of this to some degree by doing 12 count locations. Okay, so a really quick project description. So the plan for the bike ped count is to do a fall and a spring count this fiscal year, which is very similar to how the counts had been done in the past. We would have up to 12 locations. We will include in the count demographics, which would just be assumptions by the counter as to whether the pedestrian or bicyclist was male or female. That is obviously not going to be 100% accurate, but it's valuable information. And whether or not the bicyclist or pedestrian is a child, an adult, or over the age of 65. Again, not going to be 100% accurate, but still valuable. The counter will also document behavior such as helmet wearing, wrong way riding, and sidewalk riding. And I know that sidewalk riding is legal here in a lot of places, but it's still valuable because it shows us that people do not feel comfortable riding on the street. And then the spring count will be paired with an online and/or intercept survey. If we're in a better public health situation and we can talk to random strangers in the spring, I think an intercept survey would be great. In lieu of that, we'll just do an online survey. So given that description, there's a bunch of actual products to come out of the count. The main one would be, I think I missed a word or two, the MPO's bicycle and pedestrian count like methodology working document. So we will very carefully document how we do this count so that it can be replicated in the future, either by the MPO or by the locality if you want to do more data collection that is project specific and you want it to match up with any data that the MPO collects. A bicycle and pedestrian count and survey webpage on the TJPDC site, an online volunteer training video, a fall bike and ped count summary. So this will be just a really brief presentation of the data we collect with the fall count, and an in-person survey or in-person or online survey, a draft summary document of the survey analysis. Again, like the fall bike and ped count summary, just a really brief presentation of the data that we collect before putting all of that info together with the spring count data into a culminating work product titled the FY 2020-2021 Bicycle and Pedestrian Count and Survey Report. Okay, any questions so far? Any comments so far? This is the schedule that you guys received. As you can see, it's really front loaded because I understand that it's going to get even colder very soon. So we want to get the count done as quickly as possible. Under different conditions, we would have done it in the proper weeks in September, but it's going to be pushed to October. You guys can yell at me if you think it's going to be way too cold by the end of October, but I think that realistically, that is the soonest I can make this happen with the number of volunteers I'm hoping to get. And then we would do another count along with the survey in April. And then we would have everything finalized and we would do a presentation at a public workshop of the final collection of data in June, the end of the fiscal year. Any questions or comments?
Jess,
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
appreciate all of this. It looks awesome and, you know, very thoughtful and well thought out. I guess I just wonder, is even October aggressive? Like, would we be able to get volunteers enough to be able to do this year? Would it make more sense to just do them both, you know, fall and spring 2021? Because I think in years past, we did do them in the same calendar year. Not that that makes a big difference, but it was kind of odd years. Anyway, just my thoughts there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you trying to be realistic. I think unless there's a lot of people who say this is just absolutely crazy, I do want to try to push forward with it. I think limiting the number of count locations, we can still try to get volunteers to do most of it, but if we can't, I think the MPO has the staff to count some of those.
Okay.
And
cool.
Yeah, I have the money for this fiscal year, and I definitely want to do it. So I'm going to try my best, and I think it'll all come together. But any other comments or thoughts? And I appreciate that, Amanda. Thank you.
Hey folks, I had an audio problem before. Can you hear me now okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Peter.
Awesome. Well, I can, now you can hear me, but I can't hear you. And I'm glad to be able to at least speak one direction. Jessica, since you're formulating a quasi-policy document, I would specifically mention that you want to work with UVA as well as the city and the county. I think that's important, and you know, it'll help the project succeed at the political level. Also, this is something that I spoke with Jessica about separately, but the document talks about measuring the value of planned or completed projects, but also it might be good to have just longitudinal data that goes for like 5 or 10 or more years around specific corridors, not dependent on construction and projects. And anyway, the idea of construction itself is kind of disruptive. So having just clean data that's multi-year data might be helpful. So do some stuff that's related to projects, but also just have, you know, pick what are your priority corridors and do some measurement over those across time. Thank you.
And Jessica, I would add that I guess it'd be great to do a video, but if you're following the NBPD methodology, they already have training materials available that you can just download again. I mean, unless you're wanting to do something above and beyond, it may speed things up just to use existing resources versus reinventing the wheel.
Thank you for that. And I think we will try to, reuse things when possible. Sometimes I find if I change one thing on the count sheet, then it's better to just quickly make my own video than to make amendments to something that has already been put out. But you're definitely right. We will try to reuse things. Any other comments or questions about the general scope?
My only other minor comment is, certainly the city is willing to let you guys use our count equipment too. I think you called out in the scope just VDOT equipment, but we're happy to let you use ours too.
Great, thank you. I think I knew that. I just didn't articulate it clearly in the scope. So thanks. All right. If you haven't had a chance to fully read it yet and you do some more reading over the weekend or something, just let me know if you have any other comments by email. Okay, so with that, I want to move into talking about the locations. So I'm bringing this up again. Okay, so given the goals, and I apologize if this is like a little bit hard to follow. I was really trying to break things down as much as possible and hopefully keep it as clear as possible. But you guys can let me know if I did that. So keeping things project specific, I focused things into these 3 main categories at the top. So we could choose locations that we would be talking about as after project counts. So these are locations where there has recently been construction of a type of bike ped facility that may be used in the design of future bike and ped projects. And jumping over to the example I was thinking of with this kind of location is 29 or Emmett between Angus and Morton. So that location has a shared use path through the middle, or through the median. And I think it'd be really helpful to take a look at how people are behaving in that area, walking and biking, to see if that facility works for people, or if in doing the count we notice something crazy that people are doing that they show us that they either like it or don't like it. So that's what I'm thinking of for that, and I think that count data will help us determine whether that facility type should be prioritized or avoided for future project designs. So this particular example can give us a really clear idea of whether or not a shared use path in the median of Route 20 would have been a good idea or not. And we could have used that information when talking about the Route 20 project to the public. So that's one. The other category type was before and after project counts. So these would be locations where there is construction planned for the near future, and we would have the intention of counting again at the same location after the construction. And an example of that would be Belmont Bridge. We know that that there should be construction happening soon. And if we can hurry up and get that before data, that will be very helpful to compare to the data that we will get afterwards. And the point of that counting at that location would be to determine whether that construction was effective in increasing ridership or diversifying demographics of users or improving safety as a ratio of crashes to riders and walkers. And then the other category type that's project specific would be the long before project counts. And this kind of gets at what Peter was talking about, where we want to have some locations that we keep coming back to, but it still puts it within this project context by, so these would be locations where local staff anticipate bike and ped infrastructure will need to be built in the next decade. And ideally we would keep counting at these locations all the way up until that infrastructure is built, and again afterwards. I don't have an example of this. I don't know what projects you guys are thinking of for the next decade. I'm sure you have lots of ideas. And the goal of counting at these locations would be to help better plan for bike and ped projects in the location and have data available for funding applications. So those are the project specific category types. And what I'm looking for today from local staff in particular, but also from anyone else, is let's come up with 9 locations. So 3 for each category type. So that, and those would be where we count this year. The last category is those COVID relevant counts. These would be locations where local staff expect there to have been dramatic increases or decreases in the number of users due to COVID restricting travel and how people live their lives generally, and pushing people to do more outside activity. An example for that would be Riverview Park. It's already an automatic counter location, so you've already got some historical data. It would be a great place to continue to gather that kind of information. All right, I'm going to stop sharing just because it's easier for me to see everyone if I do that. But if you need me to bring this back up, I can. But really, like I said, definitely need your suggestions, and we can do up to 12 locations this year.
Sorry, for ones in the city that, you know, I think would make sense to consider, those that are currently under design for smart scale. So like the Emmett Street one, that we also have automatic counters there. So we might be able to do some count validation, you know, kind of do double duty with validating existing counters. Barracks and Emmett intersection, there will be a future shared use path along there. Also Fontaine Avenue and East High, I think, are the main ones that are kind of under design right now that might make good before and after, because they're, you know, construction in the near term. Belmont Bridge, of course, is another one. The only problem with that one is you may not be able to get, I don't know what springtime will hold, you know, as far as construction and impacts. So yeah.
That's a good point. And I think if we choose to move forward with Belmont Bridge and it becomes uncountable because of construction in the spring, we can fill that space in with another count location. So I don't want to rule it out if you think it'll be valuable to get that before data. So were all of those, Amanda, for the before and after category, because they are going to have construction in the near future?
Yeah, I think they would be.
Okay.
Just real quick,
ahead,
as far as Belmont goes, there will be, they may be modified, but there will be pedestrian routes kept open through the whole construction. And that's been a big emphasis of the plan review right now.
Good to know. Thank you.
It just might not be, you know, a one-to-one comparison between fall and spring. Yes, there will be pedestrian accommodations. I can't remember off the top of my head what that would look like in the spring.
I understand that with construction, it might not be an apples to oranges, or it might be an apples to oranges comparison. All right, I'm seeing also people putting stuff in the comment chat. That's also really helpful, especially when you let me know which category it is. So, Amanda, anything else for something that's going to be like you're looking at doing construction like in the far future, like 10 years from now, applying for some sort of funding? And ideally, these would be backed up by having been mentioned in like the bike ped plan or the long range plan or something.
I mean, I would say maybe these two that we have been looking at with the MPO, you know, like Route 20 and the river corridor crossing. I mean, maybe that's something to look at.
Great. We put the city on the spot.
I'd come back and support Amanda's one that she mentioned there, Emmett Street. I know that we've got a project that's going to be, you know, going to construction between University Avenue and Arlington. That's going to happen in a couple of years. So I think getting counts out there is a really good location and then of course they've got another smart scale application, and that could continue all the way up the Route 29 corridor. And it's a busy corridor with a lot of potential for a lot of people to use bikes there. So I'd underline that's a good spot to study.
Great. Yep, I put a star next to it. Thank you. Let's see. We've put the city on the spot. How about the county? Any suggestions? I think we might have lost the county. All right. Well, if you have any other thoughts, I'm happy to hear. Oh, go ahead, Shane.
I don't want to speak for the county, but we do have counters in place on the the shared use path adjacent to John W. Warner Parkway and have been in place for quite a few months. And we're also thinking of maybe leaving one of those as a quote unquote, even though it's portable, we may leave it in place forever, well, as a permanent counter. Again, we're counting in that location, but and we actually have two very close, one of which does break out bike ped, does do the mode split, and one that's just a pyro that counts them together. So again, it might be good to get some demographic breakdown there. And also we know that we're undercounting because people walk side by side and the technology just does not allow. So it might be good to see if that is a common theme, are the counters undercounting by, based on use, or is it undercounting by 10%? Is it undercounting by 50%? Just based on user behavior. So again, those are in place. We can leave those in place for an extended period as needed.
Yeah. So
and the counts have been really high on those as well. So we should get there should be a good sample of folks using it.
Great. And what I should clarify is that, this was our secondary goal was to ensure that, or to work with VDOT to make sure that the counters are as accurate as possible. So once we have finalized those 12 locations, Shane, I'll follow up with you and we'll figure out which of those we would want to add a counter to if it doesn't already match up to a place where the counter already is.
Okay.
Great. So I don't know, I'm seeing some comments in the chat, including from Peter saying, let's see, what did you say exactly? It's really important to be able to answer, are we seeing more bikes around town? And then suggesting that we revisit previous TJPDC count locations. So in my scope, in the detailed scope of work, I did talk about, which count locations it would be preferable to have had previous counts done at those locations, because for some of these groups, some of these categories, it's more important than others. But I just want to clarify that we had to pick some sort of purpose for these counts. And we had talked about how these really generic counts about just trying to cover as much ground and determining how many people are riding at so many different locations. That's just a really hard thing to do. And I don't know that it gives us a ton of useful information. I think Shane, you talked to us either to the whole group or to me specifically about how, there is some question about whether or not these gigantic counts that just try to cover a large area, how valuable they really are to planning purposes. So that's why I've tried to focus the count on these projects and give us, to give us a very clear goal for what it is we're counting and what we're going to do with that data to try to make it as valuable as possible. Because, the MPO did this in the past and they decided either on their, I don't know if it was the MPO on its own or if there was input from the city and the county that there just wasn't a lot of value to that data. So we needed to refocus this in a particular way. And this is how we're trying to refocus it. Okay.
Yeah, and related to that, I would think that longitudinal data would be best. Again, a 2-hour count on one day, once every 10, you basically have a snapshot but if you do the same locations every year, at least you have a better chance. Again, the 2-hour window is questionable in terms of how useful it is. However, at least if you could compare the exact same methodology from one year or any previous years that you have, at least you can start building longitudinal data. But just random snapshots for a 2-hour period, just trying to cover the most amount of area, I don't think is going to yield useful data. At least if you get it year over year or spring, fall, at least you can begin comparing to previous versus just having, hundreds of 1-2 hour counts all over the MPO.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, I will follow up with both the city and the county to review the location choices, and then I will follow up with Shane to figure out where the counters are going to be so that we can determine accuracy. I think that's everything. Does anyone have any other comments about the count, the locations, or anything else we've talked about today? Cool. I'm going to wrap us up early. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks for all of your suggestions and comments. This meeting has been recorded. I will post it on our website in the next few weeks. Great. Thanks, everyone.